The bullet whistled past Oliver Ingram's ear so close he could feel the heat of it. And in that split second before chaos erupted in the dusty street of Marysvale, Utah, he knew someone was about to die if he didn't move fast. It was a scorching afternoon in July 1878, and Oliver had just stepped out of the general store with a sack of flour under one arm when he heard the commotion down the street. A crowd had gathered near the saloon, and the angry voices carried clear across the still air. Oliver was a tall man of 26 years, lean and sun-weathered from years of working his modest ranch outside town. His dark hair hung just past his collar, and his gray eyes had the sharp, watchful quality of someone who'd learned early that trouble could find you when you least expected it. He dropped the flour on the wooden sidewalk and ran toward the noise, his boots kicking up dust. As he pushed through the gathering crowd, he saw what had everyone so riled up. A young native woman stood pressed against the saloon wall, her back straight despite the fear Oliver could see flickering in her dark eyes. She wore a simple buckskin dress that had clearly seen better days, and her long black hair was braided down her back. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23 years old, and she held herself with a dignity that made Oliver's chest tighten with respect. Standing in front of her was Marcus Holt, a rancher who owned spread north of town that was 3 times the size of Oliver's place. Marcus was drunk. That much was obvious from the way he swayed on his feet and slurred his words. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a mean streak that got meaner when he had whiskey in him. Oliver had never liked him, but he'd never had cause to cross him before either. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Marcus was shouting at the woman, his face red with rage and alcohol. "I paid good money for those beads you sold me, and they broke after 2 days. You cheated me, you little savage." "I cheated no one," the woman said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Her English was good with only the slightest accent. "The beads were well made. If they broke, it is because you handled them roughly." Marcus raised his hand as if to strike her, and that was when Oliver moved. He stepped between them, catching Marcus's wrist in mid-air. "That's enough, Holt," he said quietly. "She's done nothing to warrant being struck." Marcus jerked his arm away and turned his fury on Oliver. "This ain't your concern, Ingram. Stay out of it." "I'm making it my concern," Oliver replied, keeping his voice level. He could feel the tension in the crowd, could sense the way people were watching to see what would happen. Most folks in Marysvale tried to stay neutral when it came to disputes involving the native people who occasionally came to town to trade. It was easier that way, safer. But Oliver had been raised by a father who believed that right was right, regardless of who was involved. "She's a cheat and a liar," Marcus spat, reaching for his gun. "And I don't need you defending her." Oliver's hand moved to his own pistol, a Colt .45 he wore strapped to his hip. He wasn't a gunfighter, didn't fancy himself fast or skilled, but he'd practiced enough to hit what he aimed at. "Don't do this, Marcus. You're drunk. Go home and sleep it off." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The crowd had gone silent, and Oliver could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Then Marcus's hand dropped away from his gun, and he stepped back, his face twisted with anger. "This ain't over," he said, pointing a finger at Oliver. "You just made yourself an enemy, Ingram." "I'll live with it," Oliver said. Marcus turned and stomped away, shouldering through the crowd. People began to disperse, the excitement over, though Oliver caught more than a few disapproving looks directed his way. He turned to the young woman who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, thank you." "You did not have to do that. Couldn't stand by and watch him hurt you," Oliver said simply. "Did he really buy beads from you?" "Yes, A necklace for his woman. I make jewelry and sell it sometimes." She reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a string of beautifully crafted beads, blue and white and red, worked into an intricate pattern. "This is my work. It is strong. It does not break easily." Oliver examined the beadwork and had to agree. It was finely made, the kind of craftsmanship that took real skill. "I believe you. Marcus probably got rough with it in one of his rages and blamed you for it. That is what I think also." She tucked the beads back into her pouch and looked at him directly. "My name is Willow Fletcher. My father was a trapper named James Fletcher. My mother was Ute. She died when I was young." The name surprised Oliver. He'd assumed she was full-blooded native, but the name Fletcher explained the excellent English and the mixed heritage that was perhaps less obvious in her features but clearly part of her story. "Oliver Ingram," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." "I know of it," Willow said. "I have passed by it when I travel. You run cattle, some, mostly horses. It's not a big operation, but it's mine." Oliver glanced down the street where Marcus had disappeared. "Listen, it might not be safe for you in town right now. Marcus holds a grudge and he's got friends. Can I see you safely to wherever you're going?" Willow hesitated, and Oliver could see her weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "I have a camp about a mile north, near the creek. I would be grateful for the company until I am clear of town." Oliver retrieved his flour from where he'd dropped it, loaded it onto his horse, and then walked alongside Willow as she led her own horse, a spotted mare that had seen better days but looked well cared for, from where she'd tied it behind the general store. They walked in silence through the edges of town, drawing stares from the few people they passed. Oliver knew there would be talk about this. There was always talk in a small town like Marysvale. Once they were clear of the buildings and on the open trail, Willow spoke again. "You will have trouble because of what you did today." "Probably," Oliver admitted, "but I'd have trouble with my conscience if I hadn't. Not many white men would take that position." "I suppose not." Oliver glanced at her. In the full sunlight, away from the threatening situation in town, he could see her more clearly. She had a strong, beautiful face, with high cheekbones and expressive eyes that held intelligence and wariness in equal measure. There was a small scar on her chin, barely noticeable, and her hands, though small, looked capable and work-worn. "Your father," Willow said after a moment. "He taught you to think this way, he did. He passed 2 years ago, but he was a fair man. Always said that character matters more than the color of a person's skin or where they came from." Oliver smiled slightly at the memory. "Got him into trouble more than once, but he never backed down from what he believed. He sounds like a good man. He was the best man I ever knew." They walked on, and Oliver found himself telling her about his ranch, about the string of horses he was trying to build up, about his plans to expand if he could save enough money. Willow listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she knew something about horses herself. "My father taught me to ride when I was very young," she explained. "He said a person who could not ride well in this country was a person who would not survive long. He was right about that." Oliver paused as they crested a small rise, and he could see the glint of water ahead where Willow had mentioned her camp was. "What about you? Where's your family now?" Willow's expression grew shadowed. "My father died 3 years ago. Fever took him. I have no brothers or sisters. My mother's people, the Ute, they have moved on. I have some cousins with them, but I chose to stay in this area. I know the land, know how to survive. I trade what I make, sometimes work for ranchers who need extra hands during busy seasons. I get by." The loneliness in her voice struck Oliver deeply. He knew something about being alone. Since his father died, he'd been running the ranch by himself, and while he had friendly relations with a few neighboring ranchers and folks in town, he didn't have close ties. His mother had died giving birth to him, and he'd been raised by his father in a household of two. It was a solitary life, though he'd grown accustomed to it. "Sounds like a hard way to live," he said gently. "It is the way I have chosen." Willow stopped near a cluster of cottonwood trees. "My camp is just there. Thank you for walking with me. You are a kind man, Oliver Ingram." "Just common decency," Oliver said, though he felt pleased by her words. "You take care of yourself, Willow Fletcher, and maybe stay clear of town for a few days until Marcus cools down." "I will." She hesitated, then added, "If you ever need help with your horses, I am good with them. I would be happy to return the kindness you showed me today." "I'll remember that," Oliver promised. He tipped his hat to her and turned his horse back toward town, though he found himself looking back more than once as he rode away. There was something about Willow Fletcher that had gotten under his skin, some combination of her courage and dignity, and the loneliness he'd heard in her voice that resonated with his own. The ride back to his ranch gave him time to think. He'd made an enemy of Marcus Holt today, and that wasn't a small thing. Marcus had money and influence, and he was the kind of man who didn't forget a slight. But Oliver couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. He'd done what was right, and he'd do it again if faced with the same situation. His ranch came into view as the sun started its descent toward the western horizon. It wasn't much to look at by Marcus Holt's standards, but Oliver took pride in what he'd built. The house was small but sturdy, built of logs his father had cut and fitted together with skill. There was a barn that housed his 6 horses and had room for more, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a well that gave clean, cold water year-round. The land itself was good grazing land, with a creek running through the southern portion of his property. He unsaddled his horse, a buckskin gelding named Copper, and turned him out into the corral. The other horses came over to investigate, and Oliver checked them over with the careful eye of someone who knew horseflesh. They were his investment and his future. If he could breed and train them right, he could build a reputation as a man who sold quality stock. That evening, as he sat on his porch with a cup of coffee and watched the stars come out, Oliver found his thoughts drifting back to Willow. He wondered what her camp was like, whether she felt safe there alone. The Utah Territory could be dangerous, especially for a woman on her own. There were wild animals, unpredictable weather, and men who might see a solitary woman as easy prey. He shook his head at himself. She'd managed this long without his worry. She was clearly capable and resourceful. Still, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason, that today's encounter was the beginning of something rather than just a brief moment of intersection. Oliver woke the next morning to the sound of a horse approaching. He rolled out of bed, pulled on his trousers and boots, and grabbed his rifle before heading to the window. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting everything in shades of pink and gold. In the dim light, he could make out a rider coming up the path to his house, and his grip on the rifle tightened until he recognized the spotted mare. It was Willow. He set the rifle aside and stepped out onto the porch, pulling on his shirt as he went. Willow rode up and dismounted, and Oliver could see immediately that something was wrong. Her face was tight with stress, and her eyes kept darting back toward the direction she'd come from. "Willow, what's happened?" She tied her horse quickly and turned to face him. "I am sorry to come to you like this so early, but my camp was destroyed last night. Someone came through and tore everything apart, scattered my belongings, killed my dog, and left threats carved into the trees." Oliver felt anger surge through him. "Marcus?" "I think so, yes. Or men he paid." Willow's voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. I cannot go back there. It is not safe. No, it's not, Oliver agreed immediately. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking fast. Listen, I know this is forward, but I've got space here. You could stay on the ranch, work for your keep if you want. I could use help with the horses, and it would be safer for you here than out on your own. Willow looked at him searchingly, and Oliver wondered what she saw. He tried to keep his expression open and honest. He meant the offer genuinely, not as some ploy or trick. The thought of her out there alone, being threatened and harassed, made his stomach turn. "You would trust me?" she asked quietly. "Let me stay here, I would. I meant what I said yesterday about your beadwork. You've got skill and you work hard, and beyond that, it's just the right thing to do." For a long moment, Willow didn't speak. Oliver could see the internal struggle playing out across her face, the desire for safety warring with pride and caution. Finally, she nodded. "Yes. I would like to stay and work for you, but I will earn my place. I do not want charity." "Fair enough," Oliver said, feeling relieved and something else he couldn't quite name. "Come on, let's get your horse settled and then I'll make us some breakfast. You can tell me what happened, and we'll figure out what to do from there." They tended to Willow's mare first, getting her brushed down and fed. Oliver showed Willow around the barn, introducing her to his horses and explaining his system for care and training. She listened intently, asking intelligent questions and offering observations that showed she knew what she was talking about when it came to horses. Inside the house, Oliver's kitchen was simple but functional. He had a cast iron stove that his father had hauled in from Salt Lake City years ago, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. He got coffee brewing and started frying eggs and salt pork while Willow sat at the table and told him about the destruction of her camp. "I had been there only a few weeks," she explained. "It was a good spot, hidden but with access to water. When I returned last evening after leaving you, everything seemed fine. I made my fire, cooked my dinner, and went to sleep. But in the night, I heard my dog barking, and then there was a yelp and silence. I stayed quiet in my bedroll, barely breathing, and I heard men's voices. They were whispering, but I heard one say that this was a warning, that I should leave this area if I knew what was good for me." Oliver felt his jaw clench. "How many men?" "I think 3, maybe 4. They did not find me. I had my bedroll in a hollow beneath an overhang of rock, and it was dark. They tore apart my lean-to, scattered my supplies, and then left. When the sun came up, I saw what they had done. They had carved words into the trees, 'Go' and 'savage' and worse things." "I'm sorry," Oliver said, meaning it deeply. He set a plate of food in front of her and sat down with his own. "No one deserves that. We'll go into town later and talk to the sheriff." Willow gave him a skeptical look. "You think the sheriff will help someone like me against someone like Marcus Holt?" Oliver wanted to argue, but he knew she was probably right. Sheriff Tom Brennan was a decent enough man, but he was also practical. He wouldn't want to stir up trouble with one of the area's wealthier ranchers without solid proof. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but we should still report it, get it on record at least." They ate in companionable silence, and Oliver found himself studying Willow when he thought she wasn't looking. In the morning light streaming through his windows, she looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and tension in every line of her body. But there was also a resilience there, a core of strength that he admired. "There's a spare room," he said as they finished eating. "It's small, but it's got a bed and a chest for your things. You should rest today, recover from last night." "I should work," Willow protested. "You are giving me shelter, I should earn it. You'll earn it starting tomorrow. Today you need to rest." Oliver stood and gathered their plates. "I've got to ride out and check the south pasture fence anyway. Make yourself at home. There's a trunk in the spare room with some clothes that belong to my father. You're welcome to anything useful, and help yourself to food and coffee." Willow looked like she wanted to argue, but finally she nodded. "Thank you, Oliver. You are more generous than you need to be." "Just doing what's right," he said, echoing his words from the day before. He showed her to the spare room, which was indeed small but clean and comfortable. There was a window that looked out over the eastern pasture, a single bed with a quilt his father had traded for years ago, and the chest he'd mentioned. Willow set down the small bundle she'd managed to salvage from her camp and looked around with an expression of relief. Oliver left her to rest and headed out to do his work. The fence in the south pasture did need checking, but he also needed time to think. Having Willow here changed things. It was the right decision, he was sure of that, but it would cause talk in town. People would make assumptions. Marcus would see it as a provocation. He spent the morning repairing fence posts and restringing wire where it had come loose. The work was hard and physical, and it helped clear his mind. By the time he headed back to the house around midday, he'd made his peace with whatever consequences might come. Willow needed help, and he was in a position to provide it. Everything else would have to sort itself out. When he got back to the house, he found Willow in the barn, already working despite his instructions that she rest. She'd found his grooming supplies and was carefully brushing down one of his mares, a dapple gray named Silver. The mare, who was usually skittish with strangers, stood calmly under Willow's hands. "Thought I told you to rest," Oliver said, though he couldn't keep the smile out of his voice. Willow looked up, and he saw that some of the tension had left her face. "I rested for a few hours. I cannot sit idle when there is work to be done. Besides, your horses were calling to me," Oliver laughed. "They do have a way of doing that." He moved to join her, picking up another brush and starting work on Silver's other side. "You're good with them. She's usually pretty shy around new people." "Animals know when you mean them well," Willow said simply. "Your father trained them well. They are calm and gentle. He had a gift with horses. I'm trying to follow in his footsteps." Oliver worked in silence for a moment, then added, "I've been thinking. If you're going to stay here, even just for a while, people in town will talk. I want you to know that ahead of time. Some folks might make assumptions or say things." "I know this," Willow said quietly. "I have lived in this world long enough to understand how people think. A white man and a native woman living under one roof. They will say I am your woman whether it is true or not." Oliver felt his face heat. "I want to be clear that I'm not expecting anything like that. This is work for shelter, nothing more. I respect you, Willow." She looked at him over Silver's back, and something in her eyes made his breath catch. "I know you do. I would not have come here if I thought otherwise. You are an honorable man, Oliver Ingram. That is a rare thing." They finished grooming Silver and moved on to the other horses. Willow had a natural way with them, and Oliver found himself watching her more than he watched the horses. She moved with an easy grace, and she spoke to the animals in a low, melodic voice that mixed English with words from her mother's language. The horses responded to her beautifully, and Oliver realized that having her here was going to be far more helpful than he'd even imagined. As the afternoon wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm of work. Willow helped him muck out the stalls, refill water troughs, and measure out grain for the evening feeding. She asked questions about his plans for the horses, about his breeding program and his hopes for the future. Oliver found himself opening up to her in a way he rarely did with anyone, sharing his dreams of building a reputation as a quality horse breeder, of expanding the ranch and maybe even taking on a partner or two someday. "You have good instincts," Willow told him as they carried buckets of water from the well. "The horses you have chosen have good bloodlines. With the right mare and stallion pairings, you could breed horses that would be sought after all through the territory." "That's the plan," Oliver said. "Though it takes money to buy quality breeding stock, and I'm still building up my savings." "Perhaps I could help with that too," Willow suggested. "My beadwork sells well when I can get it to the right buyers, and I am skilled at tanning hides and making other leather goods. We could combine our efforts." The word "we" sent a warm feeling through Oliver's chest. He'd been alone for so long that the idea of having a partner, even just in business, was appealing. "I'd like that," he said honestly. They made dinner together that evening, with Willow contributing wild herbs and vegetables she'd had in her pack and showing Oliver how to make a stew that was better than anything he'd cooked for himself in months. As they ate, they talked more, sharing stories about their lives. Oliver learned that Willow's father had taught her to read and write, that she'd traveled extensively with him during her childhood, and that she had a sharp mind for trade and business. "My father always said I should have been born a boy," Willow said with a slight smile. "I was more interested in trapping and trading than in keeping house. But my mother, before she died, she taught me the traditional skills of her people. Beadwork, tanning, gathering plants for medicine and food. I am grateful for both sets of knowledge." "Sounds like you got the best of both worlds," Oliver observed. "In some ways, yes. In other ways, it has made life difficult. I do not fully belong to either world. The Utes see me as too white. The white people see me as too native. I am always in between." Oliver heard the pain in her voice and reached across the table to touch her hand briefly. "For what it's worth, I see you as Willow, a person who's skilled and strong and deserves respect. The rest doesn't matter to me." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Then Willow pulled her hand back gently and stood to clear the plates. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." That night, as Oliver lay in his bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for sleep, he thought about the strange turn his life had taken in just 2 days. He'd made an enemy, offered shelter to a woman he barely knew, and felt the stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time: attraction, mixed with genuine respect, and the beginning of friendship. It was complicated and potentially dangerous, given the social climate of the times and Marcus Holt's animosity. But it also felt right in a way Oliver couldn't quite explain. The next few days fell into a pattern. Oliver and Willow worked together from sunrise to sunset, tending the horses, maintaining the ranch, and slowly getting to know each other better. Willow proved to be everything she'd claimed and more. She had an almost magical touch with the horses, able to calm even the most spirited ones with just her voice and gentle hands. She was also tireless, working as hard as any man Oliver had ever hired. But it was the evenings that Oliver came to treasure most. After dinner, they would sit on the porch as the day cooled down, and they would talk. Willow told him stories her mother had told her, legends of the Ute people about how the world was created and how animals came to have their forms. Oliver shared what he knew about horse breeding and ranching, and they'd planned together how to improve the ranch. The attraction between them grew stronger with each passing day, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. Oliver would catch himself watching Willow as she worked, admiring the way the sun caught in her dark hair, or the way she laughed at something one of the horses did. He found himself looking forward to mealtimes and evenings, to any excuse to be near her and hear her voice. Willow, for her part, seemed to be warming to him as well. She smiled more often, and sometimes he'd catch her looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. She'd started leaving small touches: a hand on his arm when she wanted his attention, a brush of fingers when they passed things to each other. Nothing improper, but enough to make Oliver hyper-aware of her presence. On the fourth day after Willow had come to stay, Oliver had to go into town for supplies. He invited Willow to come along, but she declined, saying she'd rather stay and work with a young gelding that was proving difficult to handle. "Be careful," she warned him. "Marcus Holt may still be angry." "I'll watch my back," Oliver promised. Town was busy when he arrived, with wagons and horses crowding the main street. Oliver tied Copper to the hitching post outside the general store and went inside, nodding to familiar faces as he gathered the supplies he needed: flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and a few other essentials. He was standing at the counter, waiting for the clerk to total his purchases, when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Well, if it isn't Oliver Ingram. Heard you've got yourself a squaw living at your place now." Oliver turned slowly to find Marcus Holt standing behind him, flanked by two men Oliver recognized as hands from Marcus's ranch. Marcus looked sober today, which somehow made him seem even more dangerous than he'd been drunk. "I've got a worker helping with my horses," Oliver said evenly, refusing to let Marcus bait him with the slur. "What business is that of yours? Just wondering if you know what people are saying. They're saying you're keeping that Indian girl as your woman, got her warming your bed at night." Marcus grinned nastily. "Can't say I blame you. She's a pretty little thing, even if she is a savage." Oliver felt rage sweep through him, hot and fierce. He turned fully to face Marcus, his hands clenching into fists. "You'll keep a civil tongue in your head when you speak about Miss Fletcher, or you and I are going to have a serious problem." "Miss Fletcher," Marcus mocked. "You hear that, boys? He calls her miss like she's some kind of lady." He stepped closer to Oliver, close enough that Oliver could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Face it, Ingram. She's nothing but a half-breed whore, and everyone knows it, and you're nothing but a fool for taking her in." Oliver's fist connected with Marcus's jaw before he'd even consciously decided to throw the punch. Marcus staggered back, surprise and pain flashing across his face. His two ranch hands immediately moved forward, but Oliver held his ground. "I warned you," Oliver said quietly. "Willow Fletcher is a good woman and a hard worker. She's worth 10 of you, Marcus, and if you or your men go near her or my ranch, you'll answer to me." Marcus worked his jaw, then spat blood onto the floor. His eyes were full of fury. "You've gone and done it now, Ingram. Nobody hits me and gets away with it." He looked at his men. "Let's go, we'll settle this later." They left, and Oliver stood there, his hand throbbing, aware that every person in the store was staring at him. He turned back to the counter, where the clerk was watching with wide eyes. "How much do I owe you, Sam?" Oliver asked, forcing his voice to stay calm. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Sam Porter, tallied up the goods with shaking hands. "That'll be $4.30, Oliver." As Oliver counted out the money, Sam added in a low voice, "You better watch yourself. Marcus Holt ain't the forgiving type." "I know it," Oliver said. He gathered his supplies and left the store, feeling the weight of stares following him out. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take forever. Oliver's anger slowly cooled, replaced by concern. He'd let Marcus get under his skin, and now he'd made things worse. Marcus would retaliate, that was certain. He just didn't know when or how. When he arrived back at the ranch, he found Willow in the corral with the young gelding she'd mentioned, a buckskin colt with a white blaze. She was working him on a long line, getting him used to verbal commands and the feel of a bridle. The colt was responding well, his ears forward and his movements relaxed. Willow looked up as Oliver rode in, and her smile of greeting faded when she saw his face. "What happened?" Oliver dismounted and started unloading the supplies. "Had a run-in with Marcus in town. It got physical." Willow finished with the colt and came over to help him. "Tell me, he did, relating the encounter as matter-of-factly as he could. Willow listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled as he spoke. "This is my fault," she said when he finished. "I have brought trouble to your door." "No," Oliver said firmly. "Marcus brought trouble to you first when he threatened you. I chose to help you and I chose to defend your honor today. Those were my decisions, Willow. You're not responsible for Marcus being a bastard. Still, he will come here now. He will want revenge. Maybe. Probably." Oliver set down the last of the supplies and turned to face her fully. "But I'm not going to live in fear, and I'm not going to let him run you off. You have every right to be here, and Marcus Holt doesn't get to dictate what happens on my land." Willow stepped closer to him, and Oliver could see the concern in her eyes. "You are risking much for me. I do not understand why." The question hung between them, and Oliver knew that this was a moment of truth. He could deflect, make it about principles and honor, or he could be honest. He chose honesty. "Because I care about you," he said simply. "These past few days, having you here, working with you, talking with you, it's been the best time I've had in years. You're smart and capable and kind, and I enjoy your company. I know it's only been a few days, but I feel a connection to you, Willow, and I think you might feel it too." For a long moment, Willow didn't speak. Her dark eyes searched his face, and Oliver held his breath, waiting. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers gentle against his skin. "I do feel it," she admitted softly. "From the first moment in town when you stepped between me and Marcus, I felt something. I told myself it was just gratitude, but it is more than that. You make me feel safe in a way I have not felt since my father died. You make me feel seen." Oliver covered her hand with his own, his heart pounding. "I do see you, all of you, and what I see is someone I want to know better if you'll let me." "Yes," Willow whispered. "I want that too." They stood there in the afternoon sun, hands touching, the moment stretching out between them full of promise and possibility. Then Oliver reluctantly stepped back, knowing they needed to be practical. "We should prepare," he said. "If Marcus is coming, we need to be ready." Willow nodded, the tender moment passing but not forgotten. "What do you need me to do?" They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Oliver loaded his rifle and his pistol, checked his ammunition supply, and made sure all the guns were in good working order. Willow, he discovered, could shoot. Her father had taught her, and when Oliver asked her to show him, she proved to be an excellent shot with both rifle and pistol. "My father said that in this country, everyone needs to know how to shoot," she explained as she hit a target Oliver had set up with impressive accuracy. Man or woman, it did not matter. If you wanted to survive, you had to be able to defend yourself. "He was a wise man," Oliver said, relieved that Willow could handle herself if things came to violence. He prayed it wouldn't come to that, but he'd be a fool not to prepare. As evening fell, they locked the horses in the barn, moved the chickens into their secure coop, and made sure all the doors and windows of the house were bolted. Oliver positioned loaded rifles at strategic points around the house, and they settled in to wait. "He may not come tonight," Willow said as they sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low. "He may wait to make you worry." "True enough," Oliver agreed, "but I'd rather be prepared and wrong than unprepared and caught off guard." The night passed slowly. They took turns keeping watch at the window, though Oliver insisted on taking the longer shifts. As the hours crawled by and nothing happened, Oliver began to think that maybe Marcus wasn't coming after all. Maybe the punch had been enough, a quick violence that satisfied honor without escalating further. He was wrong. The attack came just before dawn, when the sky was beginning to lighten but the sun hadn't yet risen. Oliver was at the window, drowsy after a long night of watching when he saw movement near the barn. His fatigue vanished instantly, replaced by sharp alertness. "Willow," he called quietly. "They're here." Willow was at his side in seconds, her rifle in her hands. Together they watched as four figures moved through the pre-dawn shadows toward the barn. Oliver could make out Marcus's large form, along with three of his ranch hands. "They are going for the horses," Willow breathed. Oliver felt cold fury wash through him. His horses were his livelihood, his future. If Marcus ran them off or hurt them, it would devastate everything he'd worked for. He grabbed his rifle and headed for the door. "Stay here and cover me from the window." "No," Willow said firmly. "We go together. You will need help with 4 men." Oliver wanted to argue, wanted to keep her safe inside, but he knew she was right. "Stay behind me," he said, "and be careful." They slipped out the front door and moved quickly toward the barn, using the house and the chicken coop for cover. Oliver's heart was pounding, but his hands were steady as he gripped his rifle. As they got closer to the barn, he could hear the men inside, could hear his horses moving restlessly. He and Willow positioned themselves on either side of the barn door. Oliver called out, "Marcus, I know you're in there. Come out now and we can settle this without anyone getting hurt." There was a moment of silence, then Marcus's voice came from inside the barn. "You should have minded your own business, Ingram. Now you're going to pay for it." "We're taking your horses as payment for the trouble you caused." "Like hell you are," Oliver shot back. "Those horses don't belong to you. This is theft, Marcus. You'll hang for it if you take them." "Got to catch me first," Marcus replied. "And I don't think you've got it in you to stop me." Oliver heard movement inside the barn, heard the sound of his horses being untied from their stalls. His mind raced, trying to figure out the best course of action. He couldn't let Marcus take the horses, but he didn't want anyone to die over this either. "Last warning, Marcus," he called. "Leave now, or I'll stop you by force." Marcus's response was to fire a shot from inside the barn. The bullet punched through the wooden wall a foot from Oliver's head, and after that, everything happened fast. Oliver kicked open the barn door and rushed in, Willow right behind him. In the dim light filtering through the barn's cracks, he could see Marcus and his men trying to lead the horses out through the back door. Oliver fired a warning shot into the air, and the horses panicked, rearing and pulling away from the men trying to control them. "Stop!" Oliver shouted. "Nobody needs to die here." But Marcus was beyond reason. He turned and fired at Oliver, and Oliver felt the bullet whistle past his ear. He dove behind a stall as more shots rang out. Willow had taken cover on the other side of the barn, and Oliver saw her take careful aim and fire. One of Marcus's men cried out and clutched his shoulder, his gun falling from his hand. The barn erupted into chaos. The horses were screaming and kicking, terrified by the gunfire. Marcus and his remaining men were firing wildly, and Oliver knew someone was going to get killed if this continued. He made a split-second decision and ran toward Marcus, using the panicked horses as cover. Marcus saw him coming and swung his gun around, but Oliver was faster. He tackled Marcus to the ground and they grappled for control of the gun. Marcus was bigger, but Oliver was fighting for everything he owned. They rolled across the barn floor, each trying to gain the upper hand. Oliver heard more shots, heard men shouting, but his entire focus was on Marcus and the gun between them. Marcus's finger found the trigger, and the gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Oliver felt the bullet graze his side, a line of fire that made him gasp, but he didn't let go. With a final surge of strength, he wrenched the gun away from Marcus and brought it around, pressing it against Marcus's chest. "Enough," he shouted. "It's over." For a moment, Marcus stared up at him with wild eyes, and Oliver thought he might try to keep fighting. Then slowly the fight went out of him. He slumped back against the barn floor, panting. "Over here," Willow's voice rang out. "The others have surrendered." Oliver looked up to see that Willow had managed to disarm another of Marcus's men. And the third man, the one she'd shot in the shoulder, was sitting on the ground with his good hand raised. The fourth man had apparently fled during the fight. Oliver got to his feet, still holding the gun on Marcus. "Get up," he ordered, slowly. Marcus rose, his face twisted with anger and defeat. Oliver could see him calculating, wondering if he could still salvage the situation. "Don't even think about it," Oliver said quietly. "You came onto my land in the dark of night, tried to steal my horses, and shot at me. There are witnesses and wounded men. Even Sheriff Brennan can't ignore that. You think anyone will care?" Marcus spat. "You're just a small-time rancher. I have money and influence." "Maybe," Oliver acknowledged. "But you also have men who can testify against you, and you're injured one of them and left evidence all over my barn. You willing to bet your freedom on buying everyone's silence?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's face. Oliver pressed his advantage. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to ride out of here. You're going to stay off my land and away from me and Willow. And in return, I won't press charges. But if I ever see you near here again, if you ever threaten either of us again, I will go to the sheriff and I will testify. And I'll make sure everyone in town knows what you did here today." Marcus's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. "Fine. You win, Ingram, but don't think this means we're done." "It means exactly that," Oliver said firmly. "We're done. Now get out." Marcus and his men limped out of the barn, the wounded man supported by the other. Oliver and Willow stood in the doorway, weapons ready, watching until they mounted up and rode away into the growing dawn light. When they were finally out of sight, Oliver let out a long breath and lowered his rifle. His side was throbbing where the bullet had grazed him, and his hands were shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. Willow immediately came to his side, her face tight with concern. "You are hurt," she said, reaching for his side where blood was seeping through his shirt. "It's just a graze," Oliver said, though now that the excitement was over it hurt like hell. "I'll be fine. Come to the house. Let me look at it properly." Willow's tone brooked no argument. Oliver let her lead him to the house, and inside she made him sit at the kitchen table while she fetched water and clean cloth. She carefully lifted his shirt, and Oliver hissed as the fabric pulled away from the wound. "It is not deep," Willow said after examining it. "But it needs to be cleaned and bandaged." Her hands were gentle as she worked, cleaning the wound with water and then applying a poultice she made from herbs she'd gathered. "My mother taught me how to treat wounds. This will keep infection away and help it heal." Oliver watched her face as she worked, seeing the concentration and care she took. When she finished bandaging him, she looked up and their eyes met. The fear and worry he saw there touched him deeply. "I thought you were going to be killed," Willow said softly. "When you rushed Marcus like that, I thought I would lose you." "I'm fine," Oliver assured her. "Thanks in part to you. That was some good shooting. My father trained me well." She sat down in the chair next to him, suddenly looking exhausted. "What happens now?" "Do you think Marcus will truly stay away?" "I hope so. He knows I have leverage now, and he's smart enough to know that if word gets out about what he tried to do here, his reputation will suffer." Oliver reached out and took Willow's hand. "But even if he doesn't, we'll deal with it, together." "Together," Willow repeated and smiled. "I like the sound of that." The next weeks passed without incident. Marcus and his men stayed away, and slowly, Oliver and Willow settled into a new routine. The work of the ranch continued, but now there was something else growing between them, something deeper than partnership or friendship. Oliver found himself falling in love with Willow in small increments. It was in the way she laughed when one of the horses did something silly. It was in her patience as she taught him the medicinal uses of the plants that grew wild on his property. It was in the comfortable silences they shared in the evenings, and the increasingly less comfortable tension when they accidentally touched or their eyes held a moment too long. Willow seemed to be feeling the same pull. She started finding excuses to be near him, to touch his arm or stand close enough that he could smell the sage and sweetgrass scent of her. She sang sometimes as she worked, songs in her mother's language that were hauntingly beautiful. And sometimes Oliver would catch her looking at him with such open longing that it made his breath catch. They were dancing around it, both of them aware of the attraction but hesitant to make the first move. Oliver worried about the social complications, about how the people in town would react if he and Willow became more than employer and worker. Willow, he sensed, worried about whether he truly cared for her or if it was just proximity and loneliness. The moment of truth came on a Saturday evening in late August. Oliver had ridden to a neighboring ranch to look at a mare the owner was selling, and he'd returned later than expected. By the time he got home, the sun was setting and Willow had dinner waiting. They ate together, talking about the mare and whether she'd be a good addition to Oliver's breeding program. After dinner, they took their usual spots on the porch, watching the stars come out. The night was beautiful, warm and clear, with a slight breeze that carried the scent of sage and dried grass. Oliver sat in his chair, and Willow sat on the porch railing, her face turned toward the horizon where the last light was fading. "You ever think about leaving?" Willow asked suddenly. "Going somewhere else, starting over?" Oliver considered the question. "Sometimes, when things are hard or lonely, but this place is in my blood, you know. My father built this ranch from nothing. I feel connected to it." "I understand that." Willow was quiet for a moment. "But it must be lonely sometimes, living here by yourself." "It was," Oliver said honestly. "Before you came, I didn't realize how lonely I was. I'd gotten used to it, I guess, but now—" He trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Now," Willow prompted, turning to look at him. Oliver stood and walked over to where she sat. The moonlight had risen, casting everything in silver, and Willow looked impossibly beautiful in its glow. "Now I know what I was missing. Now I know what it's like to have someone to share things with, to work beside someone who understands me. To look forward to coming home because you'll be here." Willow's breath caught, and Oliver saw the pulse beating fast at her throat. "Oliver." "I love you," he said, the words coming out rough but honest. "I know it's fast, I know there are complications, but I love you, Willow. I think I started falling for you that first day in town when you stood up to Marcus with such courage. And every day since, I've fallen a little more." For a moment, Willow didn't speak, and Oliver's heart sank, thinking he'd misread everything. Then she slid off the railing and stepped close to him, so close he could feel the warmth of her body. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that it could only bring pain, but I cannot help it. You have shown me kindness and respect and partnership. You have made me feel valued and seen. How could I not love you?" Oliver cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "Then we'll figure out the rest together. I don't care what people say. I don't care about the complications. All I care about is being with you." "Yes," Willow breathed. "Yes." Oliver kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. Willow's arms came around his neck, and Oliver pulled her close, feeling like something essential had finally clicked into place in his life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's crazy, but marry me, Willow. Be my wife, my partner. Let's build this life together." Willow pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "Are you certain?" Marriage between us will cause trouble. People will talk. They may try to hurt us." "I'm certain," Oliver said firmly. "I've never been more certain of anything. You're the person I want beside me, Willow, for all of it, the good and the bad." Tears shimmered in Willow's eyes, but she was smiling. "Then yes. Yes, I will marry you, Oliver Ingram." They kissed again, sealing the promise, and Oliver felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. He'd found his person, his partner, against all odds, and he was going to spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted saying yes. The next morning, they rode into Marysvale together. Oliver knew what he was about to do would cause a stir, but he didn't care. They went first to the sheriff's office, where Oliver gave a formal statement about Marcus's attack on his ranch. Sheriff Brennan, a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes, took notes and asked questions. "You know this is going to be your word against his," the sheriff warned. "Marcus will deny everything." "I have Willow as a witness," Oliver pointed out, "and one of his men was wounded." "There's evidence." The sheriff looked at Willow, then back at Oliver. "You sure you want to do this, son? Marcus Holt is a powerful man. He can make life difficult for you." "He already has," Oliver said, "and I won't let him keep doing it. This needs to be on record." The sheriff sighed but wrote it all down. "All right, I'll file the report, but don't be surprised if nothing comes of it." From the sheriff's office, they went to see Reverend Matthews, the minister of the town's small church. Reverend Matthews was a kindly older man who'd known Oliver's father. He listened as Oliver explained that he and Willow wanted to be married. To his credit, the Reverend didn't immediately refuse. He looked at them both for a long moment, then said, "You understand this won't be easy. There are people in this town who won't accept your union." "We understand," Oliver said, holding Willow's hand tightly, "but we love each other and we want to do this right." Reverend Matthews smiled slowly. "Your father was a good man, Oliver. He'd be proud of you for following your heart and standing up for what's right." He turned to Willow. "And you, young lady, are you certain this is what you want?" "I am certain," Willow said clearly. "I love Oliver and I want to build a life with him." "Then I'll marry you," the Reverend said. "How about 2 weeks from today? That will give you time to prepare and me time to do the legal paperwork." They agreed, and as they left the church, Oliver felt like he was walking on air. Everything was falling into place. They stopped at the general store to buy supplies for a small celebration, and while some people stared and whispered, others offered quiet congratulations. Sam Porter, the clerk who'd witnessed Oliver's fight with Marcus, shook Oliver's hand. "Good for you, son. Your father would have approved. He always said a man should live by his own principles." The 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and work. Willow sewed herself a simple but beautiful dress from cloth Oliver bought her in town. It was cream-colored with delicate embroidery she did herself, combining traditional Ute patterns with more conventional styles. Oliver spruced up the house, made repairs he'd been putting off, and even built a new bureau for the bedroom they'd share. News of their impending marriage spread through town, and reactions were mixed. Some people were supportive, like Sam Porter and a few of the other ranchers who'd known and respected Oliver's father. Others were openly hostile, making comments about mixed marriages and questioning Oliver's judgment. Marcus, predictably, was among the latter, though he kept his distance physically. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Oliver woke early, nervous and excited in equal measure. He dressed in his best clothes, a suit he'd inherited from his father that he'd had altered to fit him better. He rode into town alone, as tradition dictated that he shouldn't see Willow before the ceremony. The church was small and simple, with wooden pews and a single stained glass window behind the altar. When Oliver arrived, he found that about 20 people had come to witness the ceremony. It was a small number, but Oliver was pleased to see friendly faces among them. Sam Porter was there, along with a couple of neighboring ranchers and their wives. Even Sheriff Brennan had come, standing in the back with his hat in his hands. Reverend Matthews greeted Oliver and took his place at the altar. And then the door opened, and Willow walked in. Oliver's breath caught. She was beautiful beyond words in her new dress, her hair braided with flowers woven through it. She walked down the short aisle with her head held high, and Oliver saw in her face both nervousness and determination. When she reached his side, he took her hand, and the touch steadied them both. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. Reverend Matthews spoke about love and commitment, about the courage it takes to build a life together, especially in the face of adversity. He didn't shy away from acknowledging the difficulties Oliver and Willow might face, but he framed their union as an example of love transcending boundaries. When it came time for the vows, Oliver spoke as clearly and firmly, his eyes locked on Willow's face. "I, Oliver Ingram, take you, Willow Fletcher, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through all the days of our lives. I promise to build a home with you, to share in your joys and your sorrows, and to be the partner you deserve." Willow's voice was steady as she repeated her own vows, promising to love and honor Oliver, to be his helpmate and his wife. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said. "Oliver, you may kiss your bride." Oliver cupped Willow's face and kissed her tenderly, aware of the small audience but caring only about the woman in his arms. When they broke apart, applause broke out from the assembled witnesses, and Oliver felt a rush of happiness so pure it was almost painful. They were married. Willow was his wife. They were starting their life together, right here and now. The small group of well-wishers followed them back to the ranch, where Oliver and Willow had prepared a modest celebration. There was food and drink, and people sat around talking and laughing as the sun climbed higher in the sky. It wasn't the grand affair that someone like Marcus Holt might have thrown, but it felt right to Oliver. These were the people who truly cared about them, who supported their union. As the afternoon wore on and people began to leave, Sam Porter pulled Oliver aside. "You did good, son," he said. "Your pa would have been proud, not just of marrying for love, but of standing up for what's right in front of the whole town." "Thanks, Sam. That means a lot." When the last guest had departed, Oliver and Willow found themselves alone, truly married and facing their future together. Willow leaned against Oliver and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling a contentment deeper than anything he'd known before. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "I am more than happy," Willow replied. "I am home." They spent the rest of the day together, talking and planning and simply enjoying each other's company. As evening fell, they sat on their porch as they had so many times before, but now as husband and wife. The stars came out one by one, and Oliver held Willow's hand, thinking about all the days to come. The years that followed were not without challenges. Some people in Marysvale never accepted their marriage, and there were occasional incidents of prejudice and hostility. Marcus Holt continued to hold a grudge, though he kept his distance, knowing that Oliver had evidence against him that could cause real legal trouble. But for every person who disapproved, there was another who judged them by their character and their actions rather than by social prejudices. Oliver and Willow built their life together with love and determination. The horse ranch prospered under their joint management. Willow's skill with the animals combined with Oliver's business sense created a reputation that spread throughout Utah Territory and beyond. People came from miles around to buy horses trained by the Ingrams, knowing they were getting quality stock handled with care and expertise. Willow also developed a thriving side business selling her beadwork and leather goods. She taught Oliver about the plants and herbs that grew on their land, how to identify them and use them for medicine and food. In turn, Oliver taught her more about reading and writing, and together they kept careful records of their breeding programs and business transactions. 2 years after their wedding, Willow gave birth to their first child, a son they named James, after Willow's father. Oliver held the tiny baby in his arms and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. James had Willow's dark hair and eyes, but Oliver's nose and chin. He was perfect. 3 years later, a daughter arrived whom they named Sarah after Oliver's mother. Sarah was a spirited child who kept them on their toes, always curious and adventurous. Watching Willow with their children, seeing her pass on both her Ute heritage and the skills she'd learned from her father, filled Oliver with profound gratitude. Life on the ranch was busy and sometimes hard, but it was also full of joy. There were summer evenings when the whole family would sit on the porch, Oliver and Willow in their chairs while James and Sarah played in the yard. There were winter nights when they'd gather around the fire, and Willow would tell stories of her mother's people while Oliver carved small toys for the children. There were spring mornings when they'd all work together in the garden Willow had planted, and fall afternoons when they'd ride out to check the horses together. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. Oliver took on a few hired hands as the operation expanded, carefully choosing men who respected Willow and treated her with the dignity she deserved. The Ingram Ranch became known not just for quality horses, but for being a place where people were judged by their character rather than the color of their skin. As the years passed, attitudes in Marysvale slowly began to shift. The Ingrams' solid marriage and successful ranch became impossible to ignore. When James started school in town, he was accepted by most of the other children, and the few instances of prejudice he faced were firmly addressed by Oliver and Willow working with the schoolteacher. Sarah, when her time came, had an even easier time as the second Ingram child was less of a novelty. Marcus Holt never did make peace with Oliver and Willow. He watched from afar as their ranch prospered while his own business began to decline, a victim of his poor management and worse temper. Eventually, Marcus sold his spread and moved away, and Oliver felt only relief at his departure. The threat that had loomed over their early days together was finally, truly gone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Oliver and Willow took a rare day off from work. They rode out to a high meadow on their property, a place where wildflowers bloomed and you could see for miles. They spread a blanket and sat together, watching clouds drift across the sky. "You ever regret it?" Oliver asked, voicing a question he'd wondered about but never quite dared to ask. "Marrying me, dealing with all the prejudice and difficulty?" Willow turned to him with surprise clear on her face. "Never. Not once. You gave me a home, Oliver. Not just a house, but a true home. You gave me love and respect and children and a life I never imagined I could have." "How could I regret that?" "I gave you those things, but you gave them to me too," Oliver said, pulling her close. "You made my life complete, Willow. Before you, I was just going through the motions. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something lasting." "Then we are even," Willow said with a smile. "Partners in all things." "Partners in all things," Oliver agreed and kissed her there in the meadow, with the sun warm on their backs and the future stretching out before them, bright with promise. More years passed, bringing new challenges and new joys. A third child arrived when Oliver was 39 and Willow was 35, another son they named Thomas. The older children doted on their baby brother, and watching James and Sarah help care for Thomas reminded Oliver of how far they'd all come. James grew into a tall, serious young man who had a gift with horses that surpassed even his mother's. Sarah was creative and artistic, her beadwork eventually rivaling Willow's in skill and beauty. Thomas was still young, but already showed signs of having inherited his father's head for business. The ranch continued to prosper. Oliver and Willow expanded their holdings, buying adjoining land when it became available. They built a larger barn, improved the house, and invested in quality breeding stock. The Ingram name became synonymous with honesty and quality throughout Utah Territory. And later, when Utah achieved statehood in 1896, throughout the new state. As Oliver and Willow grew older, they watched with satisfaction as their children prepared to take over the ranch. James, at 21, was already handling much of the day-to-day operations. Sarah, at 18, had married a young man from town who respected her heritage and loved her deeply. They were building a house on the far corner of the Ingram property, planning to raise their own family close to Sarah's parents and brothers. On a warm evening in the summer of 1898, 20 years after that fateful day when Oliver had first stepped between Willow and Marcus Holt, the Ingram family gathered for a celebration. Sarah had just announced that she was expecting her first child, and the news had sent ripples of excitement through the whole family. They sat around a long table in the yard, the same yard where James and Sarah had played as children, where Thomas now ran and shouted with the boundless energy of a 7-year-old. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Oliver looked around at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. There was Willow, his wife of 20 years, her hair now touched with silver but her face as beautiful to him as it had been the day they married. There were his children, grown and growing, each unique and wonderful. There was Sarah's husband, Michael, a good man who treated Sarah with the love and respect she deserved. And there were the ranch hands and their families, people who'd become friends over the years, who'd helped build this place into what it was. As the meal ended and people began to talk and laugh, James raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "To my parents, Oliver and Willow Ingram. They built this ranch through hard work and determination. They faced down prejudice and threat to build a life together. They taught us that love matters more than what other people think. That character is measured by actions, not by birth. They gave us a home and a heritage we can be proud of. To Oliver and Willow." "To Oliver and Willow," the gathered voices echoed, and Oliver felt his throat tighten with emotion. He stood and raised his own glass. "And to all of you," he said, "to our children who are the best of both of us. To our friends who stood by us when others would not. To this land which has been generous to us, and most of all to the future, which I know will be bright because of the foundations we've built together." As the applause and cheers rang out, Oliver sat down and reached for Willow's hand. She laced her fingers through his and leaned her head on his shoulder, and Oliver felt a peace so complete it was almost overwhelming. "We did well," Willow whispered. "Your father would be proud." "So would yours," Oliver replied. "We honored them both by living true to the values they taught us." The celebration continued as the stars came out, but Oliver and Willow eventually slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. It was where they'd shared their first kiss as a couple, where they'd made their first plans as husband and wife, where they'd talked through every major decision of their married life. It felt fitting to be there now, looking back on 20 years and forward to whatever time they had left. "Do you remember that first day?" Willow asked. When you stepped between me and Marcus, I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever seen, Oliver said, standing up to him even though you were afraid. I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish, Willow admitted with a smile. But I am glad you were there. If you had not been, my life would have been so different. Both our lives would have been, Oliver agreed. I might have lived alone on this ranch until I was old and bitter. Instead, I got love and family and a partnership that's made every day worth living. We were lucky, Willow said. We were brave, Oliver corrected gently. We chose each other when the world said we shouldn't. We fought for our right to be together. We built this life through courage and love and hard work. That's not luck, Willow. That's us being true to ourselves. Willow was quiet for a moment, then she turned to face him. I love you, Oliver Ingram. I have loved you from the moment you defended me in that street. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Willow Fletcher Ingram, Oliver replied, using her full married name. You are my heart, my home, my everything. Whatever years we have left, I want to spend every one of them with you. They kissed there on the porch, a kiss that held 20 years of shared history, of joy and challenge, of children raised and life built. When they broke apart, Oliver kept his arm around Willow's shoulders, and together they looked out at the ranch that was their shared legacy. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices, could see lights glowing in the windows of the house and the bunkhouses. The horses were settled in the barn, the chickens roosting in their coop. Everything was as it should be, everything was at peace. Oliver thought about that day in town, about the split-second decision to step between Willow and Marcus. It had seemed like a small thing at the time, just doing what was right. But from that moment had flowed everything else: love and marriage, children and prosperity, a life rich with meaning and purpose. Thank you, he said softly. For what? Willow asked. For asking to stay. For choosing me. For building this life with me. For everything. Willow smiled and nestled closer to him. You are welcome. But I should thank you too. For protecting me, for seeing me as a person worthy of respect, for loving me when loving me was not the easy choice. Thank you, Oliver. They sat there as the night deepened, comfortable in their silence, secure in their love. Tomorrow there would be work to do, horses to train, children to guide, a ranch to run. But tonight, there was just this: two people who had found each other against the odds, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something lasting and true. As the years continued to pass, Oliver and Willow grew old together. Their hair turned white, their faces grew lined, but their love never wavered. They watched their children build their own lives and families. James eventually married a young woman named Emily and took over the main operation of the ranch. Sarah and Michael had 4 children who visited often, filling the ranch with noise and laughter. Thomas, when he came of age, decided to study law, using his education to fight for the rights of Native people and mixed families like his own. Oliver and Willow spent their later years as beloved elders, respected in their community for what they'd built and how they'd lived. The prejudices that had once made their lives difficult never entirely disappeared, but they diminished as people saw the evidence of a successful, loving mixed marriage that had produced good children and contributed to the community. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1912, when Oliver was 60 and Willow was 56, they took their usual places on the porch. Oliver had been feeling his age lately, his joints stiff and his movements slower. Willow still moved with grace, but Oliver knew she felt the years too in ways she didn't always speak of. "Do you have any regrets?" Oliver asked, echoing the question he'd asked decades before. "Still no," Willow replied immediately. "Every challenge was worth it." Every difficult moment was balanced by 100 beautiful ones. This life we built, this family we created, this is everything I could have wanted and more than I dared to dream. I feel the same, Oliver said. If I could go back and do it all again, I wouldn't change a single thing. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they'd done thousands of times before. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing. The horses were moving in the pasture, dark shapes against the twilight. Everything was as it should be. Oliver looked at Willow, at the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for more than 3 decades. He saw in her face the young woman who had stood up to Marcus Holt with such courage, and he saw the accumulation of years and experiences that had shaped them both. "I love you," he said, words he'd spoken countless times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Willow replied, squeezing his hand. "Always and forever." The stars were coming out, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every significant moment of their shared life. Oliver and Willow sat together and watched them appear, one by one, marking the end of another day and the continuation of a love story that had defied expectations and created something beautiful. Their story was not one of ease or simple acceptance. It was a story of courage and determination, of choosing love over prejudice, of building a life worth living despite the obstacles. It was a story that would be passed down through their children and grandchildren, an example of what was possible when two people committed to each other completely. As the night deepened and the air grew cool, Oliver and Willow finally rose and went inside, arms around each other, walking together as they always had. The house was warm and welcoming, filled with the mementos of a life well lived. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same bedroom they'd shared for over 30 years, and settled in for the night. In the darkness, with Willow's head on his shoulder and her breathing growing slow and even, Oliver felt a contentment so complete, it was almost transcendent. He had lived a good life. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had stood up for what was right, had built something lasting, had left the world better than he found it. Whatever years remained, whether many or few, Oliver knew they would be good years. They would be filled with love and family and the satisfaction of work well done. And when his time came, he would face it without fear, knowing that he had lived fully and loved completely. The story of Oliver and Willow Ingram, the cowboy who protected a native woman from a jealous rival, and the woman who asked to stay on his ranch the next day, was a story that would echo through generations. It was a testament to the power of love to overcome prejudice, to the courage required to live authentically, and to the beautiful things that can grow from a single moment of choosing to do what's right. And as Oliver drifted off to sleep that night, his last conscious thought was one of gratitude for the life he'd been given, for the woman who shared it, and for the simple act of courage that had started it all on a dusty street in Marysvale, Utah, so many years before. Their love had endured, their family had flourished, and their legacy would continue long after they were gone. It was, in every sense, a life well lived and a love story for the ages, a Wild West romance that proved that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is follow their heart, stand up for what's right, and choose love over fear, no matter what the cost might be.